Good morning. So how many of you out there have ever bumped into a Unix system or a Linux system or an IBM system in day-to-day? Nobody? Oh, a few people. Good. Okay. Generally speaking, as Microsoft moves up in the enterprise and gets more involved in business computing, one of the biggest challenges we have is not only competing with other platforms, but how do we interoperate with these platforms. So today, I'm going to focus on really trying to do a bit of a dive down on the competitive landscape in the server market today. Talk about three competitors that we're particularly focused on: Sun, Linux, and IBM. And maybe IBM's a bit of a surprise for you. You probably think of IBM as a partner of ours, and they are a great partner, but we also see them as a competitor. And what we'll talk about, not only why are they competing with us and where are they competing with us, but how do we recommend competing against them? What's our value proposition against these great competitors? Then I'll finish off and talk about some competitive programs, talk about a new program that we've just announced that I'm actually involved in, and look at some of the resources that we have around the company. So just to start off here, just want to do a little promo. You saw some slides in Tom's presentation, but this is really, it sort of speaks for itself. This is the IDC server tracker, and IDC basically go and look at server shipments quarter by quarter, and they do it from the customer up. So it's not just necessarily what the manufacturers ship to customers, but what are the customers using when they finally buy the server and install it at their site. So it's a landed view, as we call it. And if you look at the last 4 quarters here, some very interesting trends. Windows, the nice big blue line up here in each quarter, has been progressively growing quarter after quarter. And we're obviously thrilled about this, but we've gone from, in the 50% range about a couple of years ago, up to over 60% of servers that are shipped. Now, these are units that are shipped as opposed to revenue. Revenue looks a little different. The Unix systems still garner a lot of revenue from customers. But if you look at actual units, really good story. You're betting on the right horse here. Interesting to look at some of the competitors here. Novell, still very viable competitor, shipping somewhere in the area of 500,000 units a year, but starting to wane, gradually going down as a percentage of share quarter after quarter. Another interesting one to look here. If you look at Sun have actually been fairly heavily challenged over the last year. Maybe not so much their fault. The dot-com implosion, the failure of some of the telcos, those are two very rich areas for Sun, and unfortunately that's really impacted their ability to ship units. Unfortunately for them, great for us maybe. Also interesting looking at IBM. I'm going to come back to Linux in a sec here. IBM, well, making a lot of noise and absolutely great competitor in the marketplace, great solutions. Unit-wise, have actually been falling in market share. If you look at all of their systems added up, AIX systems, AS400, the mainframe systems, Linux, and that sort of thing. So speaking of Linux, one kind of bizarre myth that's out there is that Linux is the fastest growing operating system. It's going to wipe out Windows and whatever. And IDC has actually been one of the companies that have talked a lot about that. But in fact, when you look at the facts of what actually lands at the customer and what gets used, Linux is actually pretty flat. And we actually believe it may have plateaued, meaning that it's absolutely going to be part of the marketplace, but the growth that we saw over the previous couple of years has now slowed down. They're somewhere in the 11% market share range. And, following up on what Tom said there, we've seen a lot of smoke, very little fire, and we think Linux may have sort of found its niche and may sort of grow within that niche. So just before we start talking about individual competitors, I want to do a bit of a drill down overall with the server family, where we see ourselves competing. So we really think of ourselves as having 3 identities. The first one is the application platform. This is the server to run your business applications, your databases. Next is knowledge workers. So this is providing the infrastructure for knowledge workers. So providing file and print services, collaboration, rich email experience, and that sort of thing. And then the next is IT infrastructure. These are the systems that drive your network. So I like to think of this as, the application platform as these are solutions that drive your business. Knowledge worker, these are the solutions that empower your users. And IT infrastructure, these are the systems that power your network, that drive your systems. And so if you look at where the big battleground is across these three pockets of use, looking at application platform, the big area that we've seen most competitive activity, web servers. Obviously, a lot of people out there using Linux for web servers, a lot of people using Sun for web servers, and also application servers. Clearly, as we get into the enterprise space, lots and lots of systems out there running Sun and Solaris, IBM systems running AS400 and whatever. So that's where we're seeing most of the competitive activity on the application platform. Looking at knowledge worker, file and print servers is something that we're seeing a fair amount of activity. Obviously, Novell was a very vibrant competitor for us in the past years. Now seeing Linux coming with Samba as a viable technology to challenge us there. And then also looking at basic email servers. So people who don't need a rich email experience, often going to a lighter POP3 or IMAP-based email solution on Linux or other Unix systems. And then if we look at network infrastructure is all about standards, all about protocols. And just about any operating system on the planet supports the same set of protocols, TCP, IP, DHCP, DNS, and that sort of thing. And we're also seeing this niche, especially for Linux, for what we call edge servers. And these are servers that are between the inner network and the outside internet. And these are, if you like, gateways or often firewall systems, routing systems for mail, and that sort of thing. So those are some of the areas where we're seeing, the most activity in competing with the other players in the marketplace. So if you look at our overall competitive strategy, before we dive down on individual competitors, on the application platform, really, we're trying to redefine what the application platform is. And with .NET and the delivery of web service-based applications, we think we're going to have a much more compelling model for people to build real business applications. Also, obviously, huge investment in SQL, Exchange, and other platforms there. Scale out, we think this is a huge opportunity. We've done a lot of work on scale up, and you heard a lot from Tom's talk on scale. But here we think we can have huge competitive advantage going forward. Next, integration. This is an area where we think we have probably one of the biggest areas of competitive advantage. That is, we have the technology all in the box. Give you a good example. In the application space, a lot of folks go out and buy an application server for their Unix system. And it sort of seems counterintuitive. You just bought a Unix server. How come that isn't an application server? Why is it I have to go out and buy WebSphere or WebLogic or some other solution? If you're on the Microsoft platform, we build in the application server into the operating system. So things like transaction and queuing, all of the complex application services you run to run these big business apps, is built into the operating system. Huge advantage for customers, a lot less complex. And then another area for us to focus on is, in order to really win the hearts and minds of Unix folks, we've got to be much more approachable for Unix people. And that means having Unix services built into the operating system, being able to run Unix applications and that sort of thing. We'll talk more about that a little later on. Looking at the knowledge worker space, we've seen a lot of customers exploring NAS, network attached storage devices, as an alternative to file servers. And we actually think this is not a great trend for customers. They're basically boxing themselves in a fairly limited functionality device. And so we're going to be providing a lot of innovation over the next couple of years to really change the whole collaboration experience and make that, almost make the current thinking around file sharing almost irrelevant for solving real business needs as we go forward. Commitment, obviously, we're committed on the desktop, we're committed on the server, but it goes further. We're committed on the mobile devices, handhelds, and that sort of thing. Applications, obviously, Microsoft has a huge suite of business-ready applications here. And then just innovation. Again, I think we've got to change the whole experience for the knowledge worker, make it much more intuitive. When you save a file, why do you have to even think about where you save it? Why shouldn't it just be auto-archived and auto-indexed and easily retrievable later on? And then finally, looking at IT infrastructure, differentiate through management, especially with Linux. This could be really super killer for us competing with Linux, which is, and again, Tom referred this idea of auto-managed systems that essentially can be added to your network, auto-configured, come online, can take workloads, don't require a lot of handheld administration and management to make them work. So big investment around management. And then finally, having everything in the box. It's interesting. I've talked to customers who go out and buy, for example, some of the great third-party VPN servers and that sort of thing for their systems. Often they'll even buy it for Windows, not knowing that Windows already has, for instance, VPN services built in. So a lot of facility there. It's not that we're trying to necessarily compete directly with the value-added providers, but a lot of very good basic capabilities for infrastructure built into the operating system. So with that, let's talk about each of the individual competitors. And let's start with Sun. I love competing with Sun. They're a great competitor. In fact, I even used to work at Sun. So the reason why they're great to compete with is they're actually a very good company. They've got great products. They've got a fabulous operating system. And I think competing with them just makes us work harder, both in how we position and sell our products, but also how we build our products. So some of the areas where we see Sun is very strong. Solaris is seen as a super operating system for providing enterprise services, a very large, loyal customer base, great reputation for enterprise features built into the operating system. They've got a complete product line, everything from a small rack mount server all the way up to their new Spark 3 systems. Quite good, strong ISV support. For instance, folks like Oracle, who are very tightly partnered with Sun, and a good customer engagement model, going in and selling solutions, doing services, and that sort of thing. So, one hell of a competitor to be up against, especially as we try to grow into the more and more into the high-end enterprise space. However, it's not all great news for Sun. There's a couple of areas where we're seeing that they're being heavily challenged. First one really being that they've sort of lost the momentum of being the visionary leader. There with the .dot and .com. Maybe that wasn't the greatest thing to sort of stick your name behind, given what happened in the whole .com arena, especially the flood of used Sun equipment that's out there right now. But also, I think it's interesting. They sort of led the charge around Java, and yet people don't necessarily think of them when they go for Java solutions. So sort of losing their shine there. Obviously perceived as very high cost, and they're going to be challenged as they compete more and more with us to really how are they going to compete with these standard high volume platforms that are just as powerful as Sun systems, but a fraction of the cost. I mentioned the telco space and the XSP, the service provider space, two areas that Sun's relied on heavily over in the past. These are areas that obviously they're going to have to find replacement business or hope that those industries come back on stream. Lacking a hardware and software story or a coherent story, we'll show a slide here that sort of lists all of their software assets, and despite that, as Tom said in his presentation, Sun is still very much of a hardware vendor. When you actually drill down on some of their software solutions that they have out there, it's very disconnected. The solutions you have for directory are very, very different than the solutions you have for email, for example. So, under the covers, there's a lot of disorganization on how they present a coherent story to customers. Inconsistent quality of products and services. We've all read about this in the news, issues with memory and whatever. But despite their best efforts to build a high-quality company, they're still heavily challenged here. And then we also see with ISVs, I think people are starting to see more and more that Sun's seen as a proprietary vendor, and their share is dropping. And do you want to heavily invest in a place where share is being challenged and you're going down in the marketplace? So I think this is going to be a huge issue for Sun going forward, keeping the momentum behind some of their ISV relationships. This is sort of a laundry list of, if you like, all of Sun's technology, software assets, and if you look at Windows .NET Server, what we have to match. So we actually have fairly comparable solutions in the marketplace today. I'm not going to go through each of these line by line. I do want to drive home the point, though, that even though we think of Sun as a hardware company, don't forget they are a software company as well, and they have a lot of R&D dedicated to all these technologies that you see over here on the left. So a couple of things just to highlight. Obviously, the operating system, a lot of built-in services for things like workload management, development tools, obviously firmly committed to Java and pretty much just Java. And, you know, one thing that we're very clear about is .NET's all about choice. We're not pushing one particular language on you. You can program in C# if you want, in BC, Visual Basic, Perl, whatever. We give you a lot of choice there. And then finally, looking at some of their iPlanet solutions, you know, messaging server and a number of these other products that are there almost as checklist items, but we find often talking with customers huge integration issues in trying to get these all work together. So we think we're actually on the right track here, provide a much more compelling offering, but the key here is integration. These products that we've built all work together and are much easier to manage. So one of the things I was asked to talk about is, you know, great, how do I sell against Sun? How do I sell against Linux and other competitors? And so what I did here, there's a lot of text on this page, and you folks will get the handouts, and you may want to read this after the fact. But selling against these folks is not easy. I can't just, you know, wave, you know, a couple of words at you and say, okay, just use that and you'll win every time. And so what we do is we tend to look at the competitors by scenario. Where are the competitors strong? Where do you find them when you're selling day after day? Who's deciding to choose that competitor? You know, who's the guy or gal who's out there that's making the decision to actually sign the PO? And why is, in this case, Sun winning? And then some tips on how to sell against Sun. So I'm not going to go into every single cell in gory detail, but I do want to highlight a few of these. First of all, we look at application platform. These are the platforms for running business applications today. And there's really sort of two categories. The first row and then the second row is database server. In both cases, Sun often wins because they're the incumbent. People are familiar with them. They're Unix people. They like the fact that, you know, Sun is the strongest Unix player today. And especially with the relationship with Oracle, for a lot of these folks, this is just sort of a no-brainer decision. Go with Sun, go with Oracle, and we've got a great solution. So how do we compete in that first space of both application platform and database server? A couple of things to keep in mind. And I go out and talk to a lot of customers and a lot of my friends back in the Unix and Linux space, and, you know, ask them what do they think about Windows products, and, you know, some of them refer to as Windows, and, you know, you get all the jokes and whatever. But one area that uniformly people who are doing more of a pragmatic assessment of Microsoft technologies will come back and say that the one thing that Microsoft's really got right is the development tools. You know, it's just really super best-of-breed development tools, really enables customers to get to market very quickly. And so that's one area that I think we should focus on. Folks don't care so much about operating systems. They care about business solutions and getting to market fast. And that's something that I think we just need to keep reminding that, you know, we do have a great platform, but not just a great platform, a great development tool technology to go with it. Talking about the .NET future, I think, is also a huge opportunity for us. And we'll talk about this later on. It'll be sort of a recurring theme, but we all have to get a lot more excited, I think, about .NET and what that means for customers. Faster time to market, building applications in a much more robust, quick, organized way, being able to deliver them over the web. And that, we believe, is going to be a huge compelling factor for all of our competitors going forward, how we're going to compete with these guys. Next area to emphasize here, we really have to drive home, especially in the app platform space, our abilities that we really do have a stable, scalable, interoperable, securable platform, all of the abilities. And you'll hear lots about that over the next couple of days. But, in some ways, we've had to play catch-up with Sun here. We really have to drive home the message. We're in the game. We are a player. We're just as reliable. We're just as scalable. And generally, I find going in and talking to a customer, I don't go in and start, immediately showing them benchmarks how we're much better than Sun, because often these folks, it's almost like religion to them. They get a little turned off. Generally, I take the approach that, hey, we're in the game. We're on parity with Sun in all of the key areas that are critical for you, things like scalability, reliability. It tends to go over a little bit better than necessarily going in and blowing your horn too loud. A couple of areas just to highlight with Sun, infrastructure and directory. Sun's doing a major push with iPlanet and their directory services. We run into them reasonably often, maybe not as successful as they'd like it to be. But here, I think, again, we have to push the message that Active Directory isn't an afterthought. It's part of the operating system. It's deep in the DNA of the operating system, and it goes well beyond just a user directory. It has huge advantages to the customer in how they manage their users and their systems, printers, and things like that. So really pushing the capabilities around the integrated services in the operating system, and also drive home the point about standards. We do have a very good story on interoperability, and we'll drill down on that a little bit more later on. So those are just a couple of hints. That there's lots of information on this slide. Again, just for time, I'll move on. Definitely worth looking at some of the things that we're saying on how to compete with Sun. And really, the top level message I think we want to say when we're competing with Sun: prove better price performance, prove better TCO in the long run. And so we've got a lot invested here on our website. We have some new recent TCO studies, for instance, that Meta did. Have another one coming from Aberdeen, comparing using Sun, for example, for ERP solutions versus Windows, showing huge cost advantages in using Windows on these platforms, up to 1/3 less than using Sun. Next, level the playing field. Talk about the abilities. Talk about how we can be just as scalable, just as reliable, just as interoperable. I don't know if that's a word, interoperable with Sun as any other platform. And then obviously, really driving home the excitement about .NET. So next, I want to talk about Linux. Linux is just a super fascinating business problem for us. Here you have a pretty good operating system built by enthusiasts around the world. It's freely available. You can download it off the net. You can customize it. You can play with the source. You can do just about anything with it. And for us, it's like, well, how do you compete with that? It's free. It's a movement. So it has been a fascinating problem for us over the last couple of years of how to deal with Linux. And so the next couple of slides we'll talk about where are they strong, where they're weak, and then some techniques for where we see we can effectively compete. So a couple of areas they're strong, low resource requirements, and I think when Bill Vecti was up here, there's a question about how do we deal with that, and we can talk about that a little later. Good edge server, so all the standard protocol support, good performance on especially low-end file and web low-end application servers, and very approachable and accessible. You get the source code, great community support. Some of the areas where they're challenged, mainly in some of the hardcore enterprise features, things like an integrated directory. For Linux, that's very much of an afterthought. The large systems management, having the ability to manage a farm of Linux servers. Customers do that today. Often they have to write those scripts themselves. There's not a lot of really good off-the-shelf tools, especially in the operating system, that help you there. We talk a lot about the profitable ecosystem, and this is the ecosystem not just for us, but it's for you. And Tom mentioned this in his presentation. A lot of the ISVs got very excited about Linux. They built a product, they did some marketing, they set up a support infrastructure, sort of sat down and waited for the orders. Nobody bought any products. And my theory on this is that for the Linux movement, a lot of these folks love the idea they can build their own software. They've got, can go to Fresh Meat and download, a variety of different solutions and build their own unique solutions for their business need. They don't need the software industry. And in some ways, it's kind of sad because there's no opportunity for people to make money off of Linux or open source. And we're certainly seeing this with the open source companies themselves, one by one falling by the wayside, because nobody can really figure out how do you make money in this whole free software world. And ultimately, we have to make money, otherwise, we can't survive. And then the final thing is the availability and especially supportability of applications. Yes, you can get Oracle on Linux. Try to get really good enterprise-level support from Oracle for Linux. Typically, they recommend customers to go to Solaris or another platform. So I think this is going to be a huge challenge if Linux really wants to make it as a viable enterprise platform. Just looking at the technologies, where do we compete head-to-head? Obviously, there's the Linux operating system itself and Windows 2000 and .NET Server. Apache versus IIS. MySQL, getting a lot of interest from especially very low-end folks building database apps. And here versus our SQL technology and MSDE. PHP, again, we're seeing a lot of interest around ASP and ASP.NET. That's not to say that you couldn't use PHP on Windows. It's available on Windows if that's what you're interested in. Talked about the directory. There is a couple of directory solutions with Linux, just like there is for just about everything. There's always lots of choice there. The problem is trying to get it to work and integrate it with your applications. Samba, an interesting challenger in the file and print space. This is technology for providing Windows-like file services and print services on Linux. Generally, what you're going to find is that technology is going to be playing catch-up football with Windows, typically 3 to 4 years behind wherever we are. And as we move forward and really accelerate investments in the collaboration space, I think that technology is going to be left in the dust. IBM in particular have been talking a lot about binary versus Exchange. We've actually talked to a few customers who have used binary, and we've done some drill downs ourselves. Huge gap in functionality and ease of use. Just simple things like bringing up somebody's name in the directory, so you want to send them some mail or look up their phone number. Binary takes you about 2 minutes to pull up a name just in a fairly small directory. So, and then finally, SendMail and POP3 technology built into Linux. We actually are building a low-end mail server technology for Windows that'll be available shortly that'll allow you to set up Windows Server as a POP3 server in your network. So very similar capabilities to what you have in Linux. So now the Linux sales scenario map, this one gets a little more complicated because we actually see Linux sort of showing up in pockets all over the place. And the interesting thing is, you can talk about Linux as a file server, for example. That's not good enough. You've got to understand where they are in the different sizes of organizations and within the organization. So to give you an example, for a large organization to make a choice for Linux for its file server technology across the board, it's a pretty rare occurrence right now. People are kind of looking at it, but they're a little reluctant to go with this sort of rogue software and bet the whole ranch on Linux across the board for file sharing. Totally different story if you sort of lift the covers and go into the departmental level. You'll often find a small IT department using Linux for file sharing, and often central IT doesn't even know it's happening. So really important to know where you're going to find it, and this will be one of our sort of call to actions at the end of this session, is really understand where the competitors are. It's not just a generic issue that Linux is everywhere. It's in very isolated pockets. So some of the areas to sell against with file servers in particular, again, I think we've got to emphasize the simplicity with Windows, the tight integration with the desktop and the server, the integration with Active Directory, and the easy manageability of your whole file sharing environment there. But also, I think we really have to drive home this promise for the future around this much easier collaborative experience as we go forward. And that's something that we're heavily invested in. You're going to start seeing a lot of that in the coming releases of Windows Server. And again, with Linux, it's going to take a lot of energy to try to catch up or get anywhere close to where we're going with this. Next, a lot of you have probably run into Linux as a web server with Apache. Fairly popular solution out there, mainly because it's cheap, and Apache comes with the box, and reasonably easy to set up and get it going. A couple of areas here, I think, to really drive home and talking to customers about how Windows can solve this problem. Again, .NET is the future. That's where everybody's going that matters. IBM's committed to web services, Sun's committed to web services, we're committed to web services. You really want to get behind a vendor who's going to help you get there. Linux, it's not obvious how you would do it going with a Linux platform. Next is network infrastructure. This is another popular use of Linux. We see Linux showing up as DNS servers and edge servers, firewalls, and that sort of thing. Actually, not a bad use because it's a protocol that's being supported as opposed to necessarily a server function. And the thing that we're trying to tell customers here is these isolated systems ultimately could be a nightmare for management later on. So while technically it works, if you wanted to do for instance, across your entire network, lock out a single port that's become a problem or whatever, that's going to be difficult in these sort of random Linux boxes that are out there. We try to provide a much more closer integrated management vision around IT infrastructure and managing those systems. Finally, the last one is a kind of interesting one, application server. And this is one that actually has us a little bit worried, and we'll talk about this in a minute. But generally speaking, we've seen Linux as a mail server, and the functionality gap is pretty severe, so we try to sell on the benefits of Exchange. But the one thing we've seen is that a lot of customers who were using Sun, they want to get off those Sun boxes. They want to run those apps now on another lower cost platform. Intel is obviously the place to go. And for a lot of them, Linux seems like a great option for them, which is, it's Unix compatible, runs on Intel, supported by IBM and all these other guys. So we're actually going to do some drill down on this particular one in a minute, a little later on in the presentation. But here again, selling on the great developer tools that we have, the .NET Vision, and also what we can do to help them move those applications from Solaris and get them running on Windows as opposed to Linux. So a couple of the key takeaways in talking about Linux. We have to go out there and challenge this free, 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 free message. We've sort of used the tagline before in the press, Linux is only free if your time has no value. But it's free up front. Gartner will tell you, Meta will tell you, IDC will tell you that the operating system is typically only about 2 to 4% of the total cost of the investment of a business platform over a multi-year period. Much higher investment for your applications, for your hardware, for the maintenance of the whole picture, for the training of your users and that sort of thing. So, yeah, if the operating system's free, you might shave off that 2 or 3%. But, man, can you pay big time down the road with managing that platform, training your users, trying to figure out how do you integrate your Linux systems with your Windows systems and that sort of thing. So we're actually working on some third-party evidence here. You may have read about it in the Register. That we're working on some tools for our partners and our own sales force and equipping them with helping customers determine what are the real costs. Let them do their own assessment and understand where they're going to be paying money down the road. Sell on the long-term platform. For a lot of these people, they're not making a short-term choice. They're making a platform choice for the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, Microsoft's going to be around. Linux, who's driving the roadmap? Linux is kind of getting a little tired of driving Linux, and story I read last week. There's nobody really owning the roadmap, owning the vision, driving the future technology innovation. So, that's going to be a huge issue for big business customers. Profitable ecosystem. Who's going to be around to support Linux platforms 5 years from now? Might be IBM. I'm not sure. They claim they've made back their investment in the $1 billion investment in Linux. Sure isn't obvious from talking to customers and looking at the market share numbers from folks like IDC and Gartner and others. So I think this is going to be a huge issue. Who's going to be around to support Linux in the future if you can't make money on it today? Next, lack of enterprise features and enterprise support. And, we see stories about, Linux is ready for the enterprise, just like you saw for Windows about 5 years ago. And, this is not an easy problem. There's just huge issues in providing an enterprise-class operating system with scalability, manageability. Just to give you one example here, and it's always good to sort of drill down. Security, major issue for everybody. It's, something that we're challenged with heavily right now. We're basically, we stopped the ship. We got everybody in the company to get retrained on security. We're going back and revalidating every line of code in our products to make sure we don't have things like buffer overruns and whatever. Basically, we're going to turn the ship and build a truly secure operating system and really shake up the company and shake up the industry. You can't do that with Linux. The reason is there's no central model here. That you've got, with Red Hat Linux, I think 972 individual projects contributing to Linux. It's kind of fun. It's kind of, random chaos stuff out there. But what if you wanted to go out to all 972 projects and say, guys, we got to take internationalization seriously. We all have to use the same model on how we internationalize applications. It just isn't going to happen. There's too much of sort of randomness and distribution and lack of central control to be able to accomplish getting some of these big, tough issues under control, things like security, things like management. And then finally, again, web services. A lot of customers are really starting to buy into this, that, okay, we're now finally getting what this .NET thing's all about. This could be really huge for us, could save us big money in the long run. So that's going to be something that we'll have against Linux. Obviously, not a clear vision there on where they're going. So I want to talk about IBM just for a minute. IBM's kind of an interesting competitor because, IBM is also, one of our partners. They are giving us a little bit of agony, though, around Linux. And, it's, you think, well, if IBM's backing Linux, man, that's pretty hard to compete against. They're using it to unite a number of their different initiatives, both on the software side and also for their various hardware platforms. They're really looking at it as a kickstart, a jumpstart to get their legacy mainframe and AS400 business back on track. And also, we really see that this has to be a services dream for IBM Global Services. You take sort of a do-it-yourself operating system, go in and wrap a bunch of services around it, customize it for a particular customer use. Bingo, you lock the customer in. You now own that custom solution. So in many ways, it's kind of back to the future of whatever. If you look at where IBM was 30 years ago, they'd give customers the IBM mainframe source tape. They'd go in and customize it for this particular bank, and they'd add these features, and they'd integrate these apps. And they build this very, very specific solution for that customer. The customer has no choice to go anywhere else. They're locked in. So we're seeing the same thing now with Linux, that sort of throwing Linux into the mainframe and driving this partition to do that. Man, that is so proprietary. You've totally locked yourself out from any choice going forward. So if you're wondering whether IBM's serious about Linux, it seems to be they are. This is a slide from one of their partner events talking about where Linux shows up in their 4 key server product lines. So we've got Linux on the Intel line, obviously. We've got Linux on the traditional Unix AIX or RS6000 line, and then we've got Linux on the AS400s, and we got Linux on the mainframe. And I'm not going to give you a full education on where Linux is in all of these products, but the point is that IBM does seem to be fairly serious here. They are targeting specific verticals. They are targeting specific use of their various product lines where Linux can play and where it can't. I think the big thing here, though, is to point out that, again, we really see this as almost a model for control, that they are essentially trying to provide this fairly convoluted solution mixture of IBM proprietary technology and software and services with this sort of, open Linux, everybody's got it, it's got to be nice sort of approach. So moving on, just some of the things to think about when you're competing with IBM and Linux. I talked about this, but I think we really need to expose this is not all about free software and open standards and open source and Linux. It's really a way to get in front of the customers to pitch much more of a proprietary solution. Next, I think, selling on the Windows ecosystem choice. If you want to, look to a different hardware vendor, you've got lots of different hardware vendors out there. If you want to look for different applications, Windows has a fabulous base of profitable, viable companies out there selling solutions. Some major gaps in Linux, IBM Linux strategy. Just to give you an example, IBM's talking about putting thousands of partitions of Linux on a mainframe. How are you going to manage those puppies? There's no built-in management software for it. So what if you decided every one of those needed to, I don't know, go to another bug patch release for, Apache or something like that? It's going to be pretty cumbersome to go out there and touch all 1,000 of those images. So looks good on paper. The reality is that there's some huge gaps here. Expose complex IT issues. What does this mean? So you've probably met an IBM mainframe guy before, or gal, nice person in a suit. If it's a guy, white shirt, the tie, and a blue suit, they walk around with a little book, and there's a whole culture around that. You've probably also met Linux people, not quite the same. I just don't know how they're going to get those people talking to each other. And, I've yet to meet somebody who thoroughly understands the deep internals of, for instance, mainframe technology, and also, can happily go and hack away on Linux and be able to know how to make that thing really sing and dance on top of a mainframe. There's not going to be a huge number of people out there to be able to satisfy that skill demand. And then finally, exposing some of the hidden costs. This stuff doesn't come for free. There's huge costs around integration and services with Linux, and especially with IBM Linux, and that's something that we just suggest to customers, do the assessment yourself, make sure you're looking at the full long-term costs of that solution. So if we wanted to sum this up, and how do you talk to customers, what's the killer slide that you would use about why Microsoft is better than the competition? This might be one view of some of the attributes we would like you to drive home. First is innovation, innovation around the whole solution base, servers, desktop, mobile, dev tools, you name it. We've got huge investments in innovation here, breakthrough, technology coming in management and scaling and that sort of thing. Next is economics, and making money is not a bad thing. It's there for a reason. It's there to help customers, to have viable partners to support them going forward. And so we're highly committed to sustaining this profitable ecosystem, not just for ourselves, but even more so for our partners. We want you folks to all be successful. And then finally, flexibility, giving people choice of solutions and applications and hardware vendors. Major focus for us to make sure that choice and flexibility of tools and solutions for customers is out there. And so all of this, we think, big advantage with Windows. Faster time to market. For a lot of customers, this is everything. If they can get their application to market a couple of weeks sooner than if they were using, say, a Sun system, that can pay for the project itself. A good example would be, one of our large banking customers, literally looking week by week on deploying a new project. Every week that they could move that up meant literally hundreds of millions of dollars of new opportunity to them. So, want to move on, talk about, okay, let's get down and dirty and talk about some real action that Microsoft's taking against these competitors. And new program I've actually just moved over to head up is our new Unix migration solution offering. So I want to talk about that for the rest of this presentation, give you an example of really how serious we are about these competitors, Sun Linux and IBM Linux. So this is sort of a map to highlight for the customer, what their options are going forward in this, fairly complex, heterogeneous environment. A lot of people say, well, I'm pretty happy with Sun. I'll just stay put. I don't have to pay any more money. The reality is there is a fair amount of investment staying with any vendor. You've got to pay the annual support and maintenance charges. You've got to, keep your developers trained with latest tools and that sort of thing. So even staying put has a cost, but potentially minimal incremental business value. You're not going to really see anything different in your business. You're just basically staying put. Next option, interoperate. So you may find that, okay, I've got Oracle on Sun, I'm going to leave that there, but I really want to put my clients on Windows because that's going to be much, much more productive for my users. So, providing interoperability tools for them, relatively small investment, huge gains in productivity. Next, to be able to, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could rehost all those Unix apps and put those on Windows and maybe get rid of those Unix machines. So I could see huge return on that investment, huge business value, and a less complex environment to manage. And then finally, evolving to .NET, a whole new paradigm for application delivery and a huge promise there for saving customers big time. It's going to take a little work, a little investment to get there, but potentially huge benefits for the customer. So we rarely talk about interoperability as one of our core enterprise assets. And I want to talk about this one just for a sec because you'll hear a lot about scalability, reliability, security in the next couple of days. Interoperability is an area where Microsoft actually shines, and in the opinion of some of the analysts we've talked to on this actually are way further ahead that Microsoft really gets it around interop, what it takes to interop with other platforms. So if you look at this, there's really sort of four key areas that we focus on interoperability. Network interoperability, that's basically having our networks talk with other networks, so say a Novell network and a Windows network. Data interop, so how do we get data that's on a Unix box and bring that over to a Windows box or be able to open a file that's say, sitting on a NetWare system and be able to use that on a Windows system. Next is management. How do I manage my users? Single sign-on, big area, big issue for a lot of customers. So, for example, how do I, integrate an NIS user database on a Unix system with an Active Directory system? And then applications. How do I get my Unix apps running on my Windows platform, for example? So just going around this wheel, I just want to highlight that we do have solutions across the board for virtually all of the major competing operating systems. And it really starts with, in the center, building the product around standards. Things like TCP IP and PKI and DHCP and DNS and alphabet soup. But it really is essential to drive home that fact that really Windows is very standards-based. And then on the blue part of the wheel here, you can see that we have a variety of technologies available depending on what your customer needs are to allow you to provide interoperability or migration capabilities between those. So just to highlight a couple of these, services for NetWare allows you to move your data from NetWare systems or interoperate with your NetWare systems. Allows you to manage your NetWare users, NDS user base, with Active Directory or have them coexist. So a lot of options there. Also services for IBM mainframe technology with host integration server. Down towards if we look over on the far right over here, Active Directory, standards-based technology. We do provide technology to allow you to plug in with other LDAP-based directories. We also have Meta Directory service to allow you to interoperate between things like iPlanet Directory and NDS and others. On the application front, you can see that we've got a full suite of application services for interoperability. Lots of customers, they need to have their SQL databases talking to one of their legacy Oracle databases. Those services are built in. And then we have products like BizTalk that provide even a higher level of interoperability. And then going forward, .NET is really just our branding around XML and SOAP standards. It's our approach to solving that problem. And then finally, on the bottom here, for interoperability with Unix systems, we have two technologies, services for Unix and Interix. These provide interoperability with Unix systems, cross-user management so that you can actually set up, for example, a Windows system to be your NIS server for your Unix platform. And with Interix, the ability to actually move your Unix applications and scripts over and run those natively on the Windows platform. So if you look at these Unix applications and you look at the situation with customers today, we see a huge trend of customers wanting to get off these expensive RISC Unix platforms. And we've been trying to push them along and think about this for a couple of years, but it probably wasn't us that got them thinking about this. It was probably Linux. and they're Unix people, and they suddenly see, gee, Linux, it's let's see now, it's free, it's supported by IBM and Compaq, even Intel. I can download it off the internet. It's pretty much fully Unix compatible. I mean, this is like manna from heaven. It's like the perfect solution. Man, I got to get off these big, expensive sun boxes and get to Intel and get to Linux as quick as possible. So this is actually happening. So one of the things that we've heard from customers is that there hasn't been a really good solution to get those applications over to Windows. And so you're really giving us no option. We've got to go with Linux. We're hearing this from people like Compaq. We're hearing it from our customers. So what we've decided to do is to get a lot more serious about being very prescriptive on how customers can move from Unix to the Windows base and why that's going to be such a much better idea. So what we're really sort of pre-announcing today in this forum is our new Unix migration solution offering. And really, we have three goals with this. First of all, we have to make it just so super compelling for these customers to want, they should just be drooling to get to the Windows platform because they see all these great apps and they see, wonderful total cost of ownership benefits and everything else. So first thing we got to do is we got to create demand for people to get to Windows. They just need to think that's the only way forward for them. So assuming that there's the desire there, then how do they get from Unix to Windows? First step, we're building with partners a full suite of technology solutions to make that much more obvious how you do that. Tools for doing assessment, tools for actually doing the migration, and really providing much more of a cookbook approach, if you like, with a set of tools. And this really needs to be wrapped with services and how-to content, prescriptive architecture guides, everything that the customer or our partners need to be able to easily migrate these applications. So, because keep in mind, the sort of default route for them is to go to Linux. Migrating from Unix to Linux is actually pretty straightforward. So we need to be very compelling here and show this in a very easy prescribed way. So before I jump into the program, I want to give you a little demo of some technology. I've been doing a lot of talking here of what we have today to be able to solve this problem. And what I want to talk about is a product called Interix, which is incorporated into our new upcoming Services for Unix 3.0 product. And we're actually going to be looking at a beta release of Services for Unix here. But essentially what we're showing is the ability to run your Unix apps and Unix scripts directly on Windows. And to be able to move over Unix code and run that directly, recompile it and run it directly on Windows in a very, very easy way. So just to start off here, I'm going to fire up something that you don't see very often on a Windows box, which is a Unix shell. For Unix people, this would be where they like to live. They want to live in an environment where they can have a whole suite of tools like in the bin directory with a whole bunch of things like awk and grep and sed and whatever. So Interix comes with a full corn shell and C shell and allows the user to have a command line interface that's not kind of like Unix. It is Unix. It's real live Unix. In fact, if you really wanted to get super weird here, this is our new user interface. Oh, you can't see it here. Oh, so much for that. I was doing an Alt-Enter, where you go full screen with the command line. Anyway, don't worry about it. So, for a lot of Unix folks, they like to live in a scripting environment to run their applications. So that's part of Interix. What I'm going to show you now is taking some Unix code and move it over to Windows. So who out there knows what the most popular web server technology is out there? Somebody said Apache. Actually, it's IIS, if you count number of machines. IIS is on about 50% of web servers out there. However, Apache drives more websites than IIS right now. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to actually go and grab the source code for Apache and bring it over and build it on Windows. Not build the Windows version, build the Unix, Linux version. Then I thought, well, that's easy. That'll only take a couple of minutes. Why don't we make it a little more interesting? Let's add some SSL technology on there because we want a secure site. Probably need a database too. Let's bring over an open source database. What about a search engine? We need a search engine. Maybe some web analyzer tools and that sort of thing. So what we did, and I've sort of shortened up this demo just for time, but I've taken over a bunch of source as it comes actually straight off of fresh meat for Apache and for, I'll move this over so you can see it a bit. And for all the other things that I just mentioned. And what we're going to do is actually go and build all of this code directly on Windows through the Interix technology. So to do this, I've written a script, and I've actually already unpacked all this into the usual directories with gunzip and tar and that sort of thing. Oops. So I've written a script to actually drive the build process here. It's about this big. And it's the same script you'd use on a Sun box or a Linux box. Exactly the same script, except for one thing. We're actually going to be running the configure command here, and we're going to be telling it to build it for the Interix version of Unix as opposed to, say, the Solaris version or the BSD version or the Linux version. But otherwise, this is just a standard Corn shell script. And so we fire this off the way we would normally fire off a Unix script. And what it's doing is going off and running the configure command, and it goes and looks at the tools available in this Unix operating system and says, okay, I'm getting a feel for what's out there. You've got GCC, you've got all of the archiving technology from Unix, and goes out and builds a make-file to then prepare itself for going and building the source. So we're actually going to let this chunk along for a while. It's gone out and built a make-file for Apache's the first thing here, and you can see here that it's actually compiling the code. So it's going through very, very quickly. This is pure Unix code. This isn't Windows code. And you notice there's no error messages coming up here. It's compiling exactly in place without any changes to the code. So we're going to let this chug along for a while. Eventually, I'll have to go back because since we're using some certificate technology, I have to go back and actually configure the certificate server. But the point of this is that we're going to port about 500,000 lines of Unix, C, and C++ code in the next 12 minutes while we go back to our PowerPoint presentation that's still running on our Windows box here. So it gives the customer a lot of options for getting that custom Unix code over to Windows very quickly. So we'll let that run in the background. And the point here is that this is not an emulator. This is a native Unix execution environment on top of Windows. It's running as a subsystem, a peer to the Win32 subsystem. So that's an important point for customers that think, oh, I don't want to deal with emulators. This is just as native as Windows. Why? Dave Cutler, back when he designed Windows NT, originally thought, gee, wouldn't it be kind of fun if someday NT could actually run Unix? And that's exactly what this is doing. So I want to go and talk a little bit more about some of the specific things we're doing around our new Unix migration service offering, really broken out into 4 areas: technology, services, sales, and marketing. Technology, making some investments in the Visual Studio product line, provide better Unix compatibility, things like Unix flag support for Make and Gmake and that sort of thing. SFU and Interix, just talked about that, but we have a major release coming out around mid-year of SFU, which will have all of our SFU interop tools integrated with the Interix Unix migration tools. Core Windows, some big investments there for traditional Unix users. Give you an example. Command line is a major issue for customers coming from Unix. They love the command line. They love to be able to administer the system by typing some script or creating a shell script. So with Windows.NET Server, we have about 172 new command line tools that are added to the operating system. And essentially the goal was you should be able to do anything from the command line that you can do from the graphical interface for administering the system. We're pretty close. We're not totally there, but we did survey customers, found out which were the tools, what tools were they looking for, and we tried to check off all of those. Also working with third parties, people who have technology today that helps do assessments and porting and that sort of thing in this whole space. We want to empower those folks to help us win these customers over. Next, building with our partners a full service program of not just training people how to do this, but design and create very prescriptive content on how to do this. You know, for a lot of people, it seems like black magic, and so we want to make this very easy for customers. It should be very much of a cookbook approach. Step 1, do your assessment this way. Step 2, start porting this way. Next, sales. We want to obviously train our sales force, but also our partner sales force to be able to go in and recognize these opportunities and go in and engage and win this business. And then finally, with marketing, we'll be doing some substantial investments around promoting the capability for Microsoft to be able to solve this problem. A lot of people, when you ask them, are you aware that Microsoft have interoperability tools or migration tools, their eyes sort of glaze over and they, I never knew that. So a lot of work there to really get the message out that we're able to solve this problem. Let's just check and see how our build is going. So it's still cranking along. One thing I want to highlight here is that we're actually not new to this problem. We just haven't talked about it very much. We've been out for about 2 years now helping customers migrate from Unix to Windows. And we have a SWAT team in the field that's been doing a lot of major account migrations. What we're going to do is essentially institutionalize that and make, a lot more noise about it, but also try to get some leverage and enable our partners to be able to get involved in this business opportunity as well. I want to talk a little bit about a case study here. It's great to sort of talk about this in theory, but does it really work? Do you actually have anybody use this stuff? So here we have a customer in Italy, and I'm not even going to begin to try to pronounce the name of the customer. But suffice to say that it's an insurance company in Italy. They have about 1,500 branch offices, and they traditionally ran each branch office with a Unix server. And so that ran their business critical application, and they would, upload information each night to those servers, and they had a fairly complex web to drive that geodiverse infrastructure, because these are all in different cities around Italy. They were really interested in going to Windows, but they said, before I can even talk to you about SQL or Exchange or talk to you about .NET, you got to solve one problem for me, which is how do I get my existing Unix-based app running on Windows? Because until I can do that, I'm not going to even consider Windows for anything else. And ideally, we've got a few Windows servers in some of our branch offices. It'd be great if we could just consolidate this into one server to manage in each branch office, instead of having to worry about managing a bunch of Unix servers and a bunch of Windows servers and whatever. So the desire by the customer was to really be able to use Windows for their new applications that they were developing. They're really jazzed about .NET, and they were seeing, someday we're going to get there. But they had to run their existing Unix-based apps. And they had to do it quickly. They didn't want to take forever getting there. They didn't have a big investment in developers at this company. They wanted to be able to easily do it. So the solution for this, they actually used the Interix product, the current shipping product of Interix 2.2, and installed it on their systems. And they actually had somebody who had been playing with the product for a while. They brought over their source code for their custom application and literally compiled the application in a day. So they had it up and running. They sort of thought, this can't be right. This is too good to be true. So spent the next 29 days testing, tuning, whatever. But essentially, they had the application moved over in a very short period of time. And they were incredibly enthusiastic about this. They went and rolled out the whole solution in 30 days from the time of turning off their Unix boxes and then turning on their Windows boxes. And so for us and for our partners involved in this is a multi-million-dollar deal. Would not have happened if we were not able to solve this problem for the customer, which is how do I get my existing investment in Unix applications over to Windows. So let's see how we're doing on our little port over here. So we're still moving along nicely. I'm actually going to leave it here for a second because this is actually getting to the point where it's going to integrate with a certificate server. It builds a little certificate server and it runs in the background. So I just have to answer a couple of questions during the build process. Yeah.
What are your deltas regarding security and particularly performance between running from Unix and running this all this Unix app on a Windows box?
So performance and security, what are the deltas? Just repeating the question, what are the deltas between the Unix environment and the Windows environment? So first of all, since this isn't an emulator, it's a native execution environment, you're not really paying a performance penalty. I'd love to say it's exactly equal to a native Unix box that's running on exactly the same hardware. You're going to have a little bit of overhead from Windows because you got Windows running too, and you have Unix running. So, but generally speaking, at a process level, the performance is very good. And generally, we found from customers that there's been no issues around performance holding them back. And if anything, they found that the performance on Windows is substantially better than what they were getting on the old Sun box. Related to security, everything in this subsystem model is tied around the security subsystem in Windows. So we don't use a separate etc password file, for example. When you log into the system, even if you're logging in remotely, you're authenticating off of the Active Directory system in Kerberos. So we don't change anything in the security model. We use what's already there in the operating system. So here we are. We're just building our certificate services here. I just have to answer a couple of questions, just the defaults. And it's asking me to encrypt a password into the system. So just about done here. We're going to come back to the presentation, and we'll be finished building this in about another 2 minutes.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Sorry. Is this positioned as basically an interim solution before they port basically their code to a Windows environment, or is it considered scalable?
So is this an interim solution while they think about porting to Windows eventually, or is it really scalable? Actually, we really leave it up to the customer. For a lot of customers, they have maybe 10-year investment in some Unix applications. And we sort of coarsely categorize them into static apps and dynamic apps. Static apps are ones that have maybe been around for 5 years. They just hate to touch the source code. They don't even know who wrote that stuff originally. It does some sort of server-based calculation or whatever, and ideally they'd love to just leave that in place. Those apps come over, recompile it with Interix, don't change any lines of code. Super solution for them because they don't have to think about re-architecting that, and yet they can use it immediately on Windows. For somebody who's got more of a dynamic app, a newer app that was maybe built in the last couple of years, or one that's very interactive with the user, it's a graphical app, often the reason they're going to Windows is they love the graphical environment of Windows. They'll want to re-architect that application to take advantage of native Windows services. And so in that case, you may find that they leave some parts of the application in the Unix world, so to speak, running under Interix, but maybe all of the graphical front end of it running as a Win32 process. And these processes can talk to each other. You can't cross-link libraries, but you could leave a server app running on Interix and a graphical app running on Windows. And then as they go to .NET, ideally they'd love to find a way, how can I take that old Solaris app and wrap it in a way to make it available as a .NET service? And so part of our solution here will be not just to get the app to Windows, but give them an evolution path to get to .NET. And I'll be doing a bit of a promo at the end here for one of our follow-on sessions. Paul Cayley, I think who's at the back here, will be doing a session, much more detailed session on this particular area, and actually be talking about some examples of how you can empower these apps as .NET services going forward. So let's just jump back here. Oh, almost done. So just as before we finish up with the demo, we're, as I say, just about done. The call to action for everyone in the room, number one thing is know your customers and know what they're using competitively. And we try to drive this home with the Microsoft sales force over and over again, but often they'll go in and they'll sign a nice volume agreement for Office or something like that and think, great, we won that customer, and they walk out the door and go to the next one. And what they don't realize is there may be a bunch of Linux servers behind that infrastructure that are the file servers in that business. So it's really important for us to understand where the competitor is, what they're using the technology for, and really understand why they're using that technology. Once we understand that, then we have a chance to go in and pitch our solutions. Next is, promote the integrated Microsoft solution approach. There's a lot of savings for the customer here in having an integrated approach, not just around the server and all the services in the server, but our whole approach to how the clients work with servers, how the disconnected roaming devices like handhelds work with the server. So that is an area where I think we maybe are, don't, promote this enough. We've really got to talk about how integration saves customers money. Next is, selling on better business value and innovation for today. Ultimately, a lot of customers I talk to, they couldn't care less about the operating system. It's Linux, Minix, whatever. I don't care. It's like, I got a business problem. I got to solve this problem as quickly as possible. I got to save money, especially in these economic times. And so here we really have to drive home the message around better business value. For a lot of customers, it's really obvious. Yeah, this is going to be cheaper than running on Sun systems. Maybe not so obvious that it's cheaper than Linux. So we need to provide you with those tools, and we all need to do a better message there. And then finally, sell heavily on the .NET vision for tomorrow, especially as it relates to customers. What's the benefit to the customer? Why is that going to be so important for them? So I'm just going to jump back here and see where we are. Okay, finally finished building this. So we've completed the build of this, and what I'm going to do is while I'm yapping here, go and actually install all of this. So this is going to installing all the binaries in the appropriate places. It's actually going to go and also take the website that I had running on a Linux box and move that over and install the files in the Apache directories. That's what it's doing right here now. And then it'll enable the Apache service, bring it up, and then we'll actually go be able to see the website up running on Apache on Windows. So while we're waiting for this last little bit, we're almost done here. I see there's a question in the back. Okay. The question is, are we going to have services for Unix and Interix embedded in the server, or is it available separately? And also, does it run on professional or the client systems? So to answer the first question, this product is available as a separate product in the standard distribution channels. The new SFU 3.0 product will be $99. That incorporates all of the SFU, interop, NFS technology, as well as all of the Interix technology. We actually, not every single customer has this issue of having to interoperate with Unix systems, so we felt it was still more appropriate to have this available separately. On the second question, this product runs just as well on professional as it does on server, and in fact, our focus around Unix migration is not just on server, but also on the client-based systems. A lot of folks wanting to get off of those expensive Sun workstations and get over to a Windows-based platform. And so, it's available, both platforms, same price on either platform. Another question back there?
Interix itself, how does it handle its memory and resource allocation? Is it dynamic or is it more static on virtual machine?
It is dynamic, so it doesn't grab a partition, if you like. If you go and look at the process table, you'll see that the Interix applications show up as processes in the task manager, for example. So it's only using as much memory as needed for those applications. It doesn't grab its own full swap space or whatever. Any question here?
What about running Intel Linux binary? I noticed in your script you had to set the forwarding type. So somebody set up for a forwarding file, or they tested their code base against the Interix platform. Yes, it's another Unix platform. Why not just run the binary?
So the question is, why not just run the Linux binary? Binary compatibility is really, really hard, and it's really hard to get it right. And the beauty about the Linux world is it's all about source, right? So, our feeling was that if you could at least give the customers a way to get their source code over and recompile it, then you'll be able to optimize it for that native operating system as opposed to trying to emulate another binary execution format. So we chose the route to go, or the route to go with source compatibility as opposed to binary compatibility. So I'll take another couple of questions. So we finally finished this demo. It took about, I think it took about 18 minutes to build about 500,000 lines of Unix source code, install it as a Windows service. And now if we bring up our web browser, we'll actually see our little website up here running on Apache. It's taking longer to bring up Explorer than it did to build the code. Here we go. So there's a little website that one of our developers had for an early music site. So this is now running on Apache, the Unix version of Apache running on top of the Windows kernel, including, for instance, full SSL support. So it actually asks if I want to trust this site and go in and place an order and that sort of thing. I installed a little search engine here, so I can go in and search for the word. Since this is a music site, I'll go search for the word Bach. It's using the htdig stuff. So an example of some fairly complex Unix code. It's been patched. We grabbed all the latest patches. We added new Apache modules to it, similar to what a customer is going to find in a real-world environment. It's not just pure code. It's going to be third-party library required. Potentially, there's going to be patches required. So just a good working example of how this can actually work in the real world. So I think we're just about ready for lunch here. So I'll take one more question if there is one. See one in the back there. So I think the question is it running natively on top of the Windows operating system, and can you take advantage of things like load balancing and that sort of thing? So to some extent, yes. To some extent, no. Some things are more naturally supported in the Unix environment than they are in the Windows environment, and vice versa. So you can manage the system remotely. You can access the system remotely. It is a Windows component. It fits in the Windows management security model. So it's not this rogue thing running off on the side. So it is essentially built into the system. Okay, take one more question, and then we'll quit. Yeah.
Can this subsystem run the X Windows windowing?
Yes. The question was, does it run X Windows? Yes. There's a full version of X11 on here. All of the clients, and assuming you have an X server, like the Hummingbird X server or WRQ or one of the others, you can bring up that X server and then display your X applications and bring them over just as easily. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. If you want more information on this, come to this session. Great. Thanks a lot.